And good afternoon. I'm Al Kresta, thanking you for being with me. Now, over the weekend, very troubling events in Charlottesville, Virginia. Again, a relatively small group of what we call alt-right group. I'm going to explain a little bit about what alt-right is today, because they have now come clean and they've made it very clear that what unites them is the belief in their biological superiority. They are white supremacists, and racism, racialism, that's what unites them. And I want to go over some of that and let you hear for yourself from one of their most articulate spokesmen. In fact, I interviewed Jared Taylor many years ago now, back when before he was identified with the alt-right. At that time, he was complaining about welfare reform. But what we know from him is his belief that, well, to be honest with you, black people are intellectually inferior to white people. That's what he teaches. So, in fact, why don't we take a listen to him? Maybe that's a good way to begin this, because you hear everybody saying the alt-right. You say, what's the alt-right? Listen to Jared Taylor. He is, again, I think their most articulate person. He's an American white nationalist. He's a white supremacist. He's the founder and editor of American Renaissance. It's a white supremacist publication. So take a listen to what he says about the alt-right and what unites all of these groups that were represented under the banner of Unite the Right this weekend in Charlottesville.
The alt-right is united in rejecting the current dogma that all races are equal. Races are different. They differ in average levels of intelligence. They do not build identical societies. And there is no reason to think non-whites can maintain Western civilization, the civilization that whites created. Hillary Clinton and the press have tried to tie the alt-right to Alex Jones and to various people associated with Breitbart.com and to Donald Trump himself. This is dishonest. None of these people has ever taken up the cause of white identity or talked openly about race and IQ. We may be sympathetic to people such as Steve Bannon of Breitbart and Donald Trump because of their views on immigration, but they have never spoken up for explicitly white interests.
So that gives you some idea from, again, the man who I consider to be the most articulate of the white nationalists and white supremacists. That's who was represented in this banner, Unite the Right. It's not about uniting the right. It's about uniting the racists. That's what they were doing. So don't be fooled. People who are actually politically conservative were not associated with this alt-right breakout this weekend. There's something else involved here too, and that is that the opposition to the alt-right march wasn't just the good citizens of Charlottesville, Virginia. It wasn't just some of their pastors. It wasn't just citizens with a common decency. This was an event that was gleefully entered into by radical left-wing groups as well, often under the banner of Antifa. You might have even seen posters, anti-fascist banners down there. This is a radical left-wing group. It involves Maoist communists. It involves anarchists. They show up at these events. Oftentimes they're part of anti-globalization protests as well. They usually show up in vastly greater numbers than the actual alt-right racist sorts, and they come prepared for battle, just like the alt-right comes prepared for battle. And they expect to have street battle. That is what they both look forward to. They like the media attention. It helps them grow. It gives them publicity. And unfortunately, people like Chris Cuomo over at CNN keep describing this as two parties down there, the bad guys and the good guys. That's not the way it was. You've got two bad guys and one good guy. You got a radical left, you have a radical racist, and you have the decent people of Charlottesville. So you just think for yourself. There is no big explosion of white supremacy in America right now. And don't trust the media on this, trust your own experience. Just ask yourself the question, do you know anybody, personally have any friends or relatives who believe that America should be a white nation? In other words, they would act to make America a white nation. Do you have any friends who would march or go to a rally or hold a sign in favor of white supremacy? Do you know of a political party that represents white supremacists? A plausible party, one that you might even consider voting for? My guess is the answer is absolutely no. No. You don't know friends and relatives who want a white America. So why are you worried that there's going to be this great white backlash? America is not on the verge of accepting white supremacy as a viable future for America. Ben Shapiro has really been attacked by this alt-right group. Says he thinks this comes down to about 1,600 Twitter accounts. But they're especially big at filling comm boxes, and, they have a savvy on internet and social media. Now, I want you to hear what the president said today, too, because there was a lot of complaining about his reaction to Charlottesville. I thought what he said was fairly strong. There was a clumsy phrase where he said there was violence on all sides, and people accused him of creating a moral equivalence between the good people of Charlottesville and the racists. But my suspicion is that he stumbled at that point, and he actually knew that there is this radical left thing there. So I think he probably knew there were two warring factions. Let's listen to what he had to say today, though, because it was much clearer. Let's hear President Trump's comments today.
As I said on Saturday, we condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence. It has no place in America. And as I have said many times before, no matter the color of our skin, we all live under the same laws. We all salute the same great flag. And we are all made by the same Almighty God. We must love each other, show affection for each other, and unite together in condemnation of hatred, bigotry, and violence. We must rediscover the bonds of love and loyalty that bring us together as Americans. Racism is evil, and those who cause violence in its name are criminals and thugs, including the KKK, neo-Nazis, white supremacists, and other hate groups that are repugnant to everything we hold dear as Americans. We are a nation founded on the truth that all of us are created equal. We are equal in the eyes of our Creator. We are equal under the law, and we are equal under our Constitution.
Now, let me join the president on this point and say the alt-right explicitly, in their spokesman, have made it clear they do not believe that we have equality under the law or spiritual equality. Many of those spokesmen within the racist alt-right do not believe that the human race is one race. They believe in multiple origins. The races have different origins. We'll talk more about this later, but unfortunately, we are being failed by those large networks that should be doing this work. We're going to talk with a woman who was there, and she'll describe what she saw. Good afternoon. I'm Al Kresta, thanking you for being here. I want to pick up on what Lisa was saying, and confirms what I said at the top of the show. You don't have two groups down there. You had three groups. And I learned this years ago, back in the late 1980s and early 90s, and I actually saw it as well back in the New Haven, when New Haven was almost in a riot situation during the trial of Bobby Seale, the Black Panther. And these situations, these tense political situations where you've got an extreme group that's going to go marching, whether it's the Klan that's going to go march through Skokie, Illinois, or what you had happening in Charlottesville, Virginia, where you have the alt-right. And again, I want to stress, we know that the alt-right is what binds them together is their commitment to white supremacy, all right? When you've got something like that, you can count on them being opposed. And they're going to be opposed by two groups. So, for instance, during Operation Rescue, when Christians would show up at the abortion clinic and sit down in peaceful and prayerful resistance, two groups would show up. One group would be the kind of mainstream feminist, largely white, largely middle class, and they might say something like, keep your rosary off our ovaries, That's about as strong as they got. But there was another group, and at that time they were working under the banner of Refuse and Resist. And this group was composed of Maoist communists, anarchists. They were also composed of Trotskyites. And at that time, really far-out homosexual activist sorts, very extreme folks. Now, we never were hit by the mainline white middle-class feminist sorts. They didn't do any violence. But the group Refuse and Resist, you could always count on them to bite, pour water on you in January, kick, elbow, and in some cases punch. And Christians, we took a vow of nonviolence at these places, and so we absorbed it. The newspapers and the TV media would come, and at that night you would hear something on the television like this. Violence broke out in an abortion clinic today when pro-life people engaged in protest. And the implication was that the pro-life people are the ones who generated the violence. But what the violence was committed by, in this case, radical leftists. Now, Charlottesville, Virginia is a very different situation in that the alt-right came with the expectation of violence. They want violence. They want to provoke. They want an antagonistic opposite. But middle-class white Americans who hate racism generally aren't violent. So the local Baptist pastor who would show up and say, we don't want hate in our community. The grandmother who would show up, and say, I've been a teacher here for 50 years. We don't want hate in our community. Those people are going to show up and oppose these racists. But there's another group, and they're left-wing activists. And do not misunderstand me. These are not the same people as your, again, middle-class protesters. These are, in many cases, full-time professional protesters. This is what they do. They travel from out of state. You saw many of them during the Occupy Wall Street thing. You saw them during the Seattle anti-globalization breakout. These are groups, right now they're commonly called the Torch Antifa Network. You might have seen those signs, Antifa or anti-fascist. They're not against fascism. They are actually leftist organizations. They're anarcho-communist. They're anarcho-syndicalist. They're new communist, based often on Maoist thought. You still have Trotskyites out there. This is what they do. The sad case of the 32-year-old woman who was killed. Her group is called the Industrial Workers of the World. And this is a group of anarcho-syndicalists. They have a long history of left-wing activism with ties to both socialist and anarchist labor movements. And this doesn't mean she was there legitimately. But what I'm saying is you have to ask yourself who's there and why. This is not a split between two groups. You have decent people who show up because they do not want their community identified with racism. You also have radical left-wing groups that are there to provoke the alt-right. The alt-right knows those left-wing groups are going to be there. They want fighting. Now, I'm told that Fox News is finally beginning to pick up on this. I hope CNN picks up on it. We'll see. I don't know. But I just got, while I was on the air, I got a note here, and Brian told me this was a woman who sent this note. All I have are the words, "Sure sounds like you think there's something wrong with being against fascism." You know, this is the kind of unintelligent, lack of attention kind of remark that comes up. Didn't you hear what I'm saying? I'm saying here, this group, you can go do a Wikipedia look. Do something as simple as looking at Wikipedia. Look up Antifa in Wikipedia and see, because they get a chance to correct mistakes on their Wikipedia page. And you'll see how they describe themselves, all right? Just go ahead and do that. Being against fascism, we're not, look, this is not Benito Mussolini's Italy, and it's not Hitler's Germany. We don't have fascism running around in this land right now. That is code that the radical left uses to fight back against any group they think is too far to the right. So let's take a look. In fact, I got a press release from one group this morning from Melville House with pretty vile language, where they're talking about what they're trying to accomplish there. They identify themselves as having been involved with Occupy Wall Street, and they try to present themselves as fighting fascism with anti-fascism. But the truth is, their vision of America's future is, again, works in an anarchist way or an anarchist, quote, communist way. There's a lot of very weird left-wing organizations right now. They split as often. They're fratricidal, and so they're constantly shooting at each other until they get an enemy like the alt-right. Now, here's another thing that I watched over the weekend. I watched people thinking that America is facing a crisis of like the return of the KKK or the neo-Nazis. Trust your own experience on this. I keep going over this. Trust your own experience. Go talk to listen to the journals. Go to c-ville.com. c-ville.com. This is a Charlottesville publication. Lisa works for it, who we talked to last hour. And they do profiles of some of the alt-right people who are there. These are very undesirable people, no doubt about it. I'm hoping they're going to do profiles of, again, the Antifa people, so you can get a sense of where they're coming from. But ask yourself this question. Do you have any friends who believe America should be a white nation? Do you think have any friends who think they would go to a rally and hold up a sign in favor of white supremacy? Do you know of a political party, a plausible political party that might get actual votes, who are white supremacists? And the answer, of course, is no. Now, you couldn't say that in Germany in 1932. We're not on the brink. We are not on the brink of a rebirth of immediately post-Civil War clan work. I mean, it's not going to happen. The American people don't believe in white supremacy. Again, these far-out groups, these Antifa groups, these radical left groups want to try to paint a picture of America that ignores all the virtues of our history and tries to punish us for some of the sins of our history, of which there are many. But the truth is, the American people have grown. And they've grown beyond racial slavery. They've gone beyond institutional racism. And while there'll always be some sense of personal prejudice in certain people's lives, America has no desire, the American middle class has no desire to go to a white supremacist organization. It's not going to happen. What you're seeing are pseudo-events. These are events that are created for the purpose of being reported. And especially when you can get violence associated with them, then you get more reporting on it. And again, there's no such thing as bad publicity when you're part of a radical political group. Now, tomorrow we'll be celebrating the dogma of the Assumption. And this is where Catholics have to come back and remember there's only one race, the human race. We have to listen to what Jesus taught about even loving our enemies. And that includes the alt-right and it includes the Antifa. We're not supposed to just love the people that are like ourselves. The hard thing is learning how to love the people with whom we deeply, deeply disagree, and we try to avoid violently disagreeing. That's where you know whether you're growing spiritually or not. If you can actually pray with some measure of passion for the alt-right and for the radical leftists like this. Tomorrow is, again, the Feast of the Assumption. It's a good time for us to reflect upon the great saving events of Christ, starting with, of course, the resurrection, the sending of the Holy Spirit at Pentecost, and now moving towards the bodily Assumption. So, again, take time. Our bishops are urging us to pray at this time in our history. I do think, unfortunately, we're not getting the reporting that makes for building a strong nation. We're getting very, very self-serving reporting on the part of, at least yesterday, CNN and Fox both. Anyways, troubling times, but nothing to keep us from tomorrow's Holy Day of Obligation and lifting America up and asking Our Lady, who's the patroness of the Americas, to do her bidding.